This is HOA anger. I watched the chain rattle, and she watched me panic. Welcome. Settle in, because this one gets wild fast. This is not getting delayed, Janice shouted across the driveway, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She jabbed a finger at my work van like it was a bomb about to detonate. Your car is a hazard, and the hazard fee is non-refundable. I stood there in my black work shirt, hood up against the morning glare, watching the tow truck reverse into my driveway with its amber lights spinning lazy circles. The wheel lift arm was already unfolding, hydraulic hiss loud enough to make the neighbor's dog bark. Janice Nelson, Safety Committee Chair for the Commons at Maplewood Parking Compliance Association, stood between me and my van, with a glove box envelope of certified slips in one hand and a reflective vest stretched tight across her white light jacket. Her red bucket hat sat crooked on her head, brown ponytail swinging as she turned to wave the tow driver closer. I am calling management, and I am going to be dramatic about it, she said, pulling out her phone like it was a weapon. This was Huntsville, Alabama, in a planned community where every street looked like a showroom and every mailbox had to match. I worked as a cable installer, which meant I dealt with access gates, guest parking, and permit rules every single day. I knew the drill. I had followed the drill. My van was parked legally in guest parking, guest pass on the dashboard, nowhere near a fire lane. But Janice had decided I was her example, and she was not asking questions. The conflict started 3 days earlier when I came home from a double shift and found a warning sticker slapped on my windshield. No readable text, just a bright orange rectangle with a QR code and a threat. I peeled it off and checked the portal, the neighborhood app where residents posted car photos and accusations like it was a true crime forum. Someone had uploaded a picture of my van with the caption "Blocking emergency access?" ? The post had 47 comments in 2 hours, half of them demanding a tow, the other half arguing about whether guest parking counted as a fire lane if it was near a hydrant. It did not. I checked the county map. The hydrant was on the opposite curb, 15 feet away, with a clearly marked yellow zone that my van was not touching. I messaged Janice through the portal because she ran the safety committee and her profile said she handled parking enforcement. I kept it polite, asked for clarification, attached a photo showing the distance between my van and the hydrant. She replied in under a minute. I can put you on the agenda and keep you there. That was it. No clarification, no apology, just a threat wrapped in bureaucratic language. The next morning, I woke up to another sticker, this one on the driver's side window. I peeled it off and found a certified slip tucked under my wiper blade. The slip had no readable text, just a logo and a date stamp. I took it inside and called the management company listed on the HOA website. They told me Janice was authorized to issue violations for parking, but they could not explain what rule I had broken because the system was still being updated and the deadlines had not been posted yet. I asked when they would be posted. The woman on the phone said soon, very soon, and then hung up. That afternoon, I installed cable at a house 2 blocks away and came back to find a tire clamp locked onto my rear wheel. It was a heavy-duty model, bright yellow, with a warning tag zip-tied to the spokes. I crouched down and took a picture, then called the number on the tag. A man answered and said the clamp was placed by HOA authorization and the release fee was $200, non-refundable, plus $50 for every day it stayed on. I told him I had not received any notice about a violation or a deadline. He said that was between me and the HOA and hung up. I let her think I was cornered, because my trump card needed her to overreach. That clamp was the first piece of proof I needed, but I could not play it yet. Janice had to dig herself deeper first. I called the management company again and got a different person. This one told me Janice had filed a formal complaint claiming my van was blocking emergency access and that she had authorization to escalate enforcement if I did not comply with removal within 24 hours. I asked what removal meant. He said relocate the vehicle off property or face towing. I told him my van was in guest parking, not blocking anything, and that I had a valid guest pass. He put me on hold for 6 minutes, then came back and said the guest pass system was under review and all passes issued before the new portal launch might be expired. I asked when the portal launched. He said he would have to check and call me back. He did not call back. That night I went to the monthly HOA meeting at the clubhouse. The agenda was printed on a sandwich board outside the door. No readable text, just a list of bullet points. I sat in the back and waited for parking enforcement to come up. Janice sat in the front row wearing her reflective vest over her white light jacket, red bucket hat perched on her head like a crown. When the board president asked for committee reports, Janice stood and launched into a speech about vehicle safety and emergency access. She did not mention me by name, but she kept glancing back at me every few sentences. She said the association had identified several high-risk violators who refused to follow clear guidelines, and that the board needed to support strong enforcement to protect property values and resident safety. She said the safety committee had partnered with a certified towing vendor to provide rapid response for hazardous vehicles, and that the partnership included after-hours service to handle urgent situations. The board president nodded along and thanked her for her diligence. One of the other board members asked if the vendor had been vetted. Janice said they had been used by 3 other associations in the area and had excellent reviews. Nobody asked what excellent meant. Nobody asked if residents had been notified about the partnership or the new enforcement timeline. The board voted to approve expanded enforcement authority for the safety committee, 4-1, and moved on to landscaping. I stayed after the meeting and tried to catch the board president on his way out. He was a retired engineer named Ed who had lived in the neighborhood for 12 years and usually seemed reasonable. I asked him if he could clarify the parking rules because I was getting conflicting information. He glanced at Janice, who was packing up her folder near the door, and told me to submit a written request through the portal and the board would respond within 30 days. I told him 30 days was too long because I had a clamp on my wheel and a $200 fee ticking up. He frowned and said he was not aware of any active clamps and that I should contact the management company. I told him I had contacted them twice. He shrugged and said he would look into it, then walked out. If this sounds familiar, hit that like button and subscribe, because HOA stories like this need to be told. Janice caught me in the parking lot before I could get to my van. She walked straight up to me and stopped 2 feet away, close enough that I could see the stitching on her reflective vest. I am calling management, and I am going to be dramatic about it, she said again, louder this time. You think you can go around me to Ed? You think you can ignore the process? I told her I was not ignoring anything, I just wanted to understand what rule I had broken. She pulled out her phone and held it up like she was filming me. I have you on record refusing to relocate a hazardous vehicle, she said. I have witnesses. I have documentation. You missed the deadline because you did not check the portal, and now you are trying to blame the committee for your negligence. I asked what deadline. She said the email went out 2 weeks ago. I told her I never got an email. She said that was not her problem, and that the HOA was not responsible for spam filters or user error. She turned and walked back toward the clubhouse, calling over her shoulder that the tow vendor had been notified and would be on site within 48 hours to remove my vehicle if I did not comply. I stood there in the parking lot, watching her go, and checked my email on my phone. No email from the HOA. No email from the management company. No email from Janice. I scrolled back 3 weeks just to be sure. Nothing. The next day I called the tow vendor directly. The same man answered. I told him I was the owner of the van with the clamp and that I wanted to confirm the authorization. He said the authorization came from the HOA Safety Committee and was valid. I asked if he had a copy of the violation notice or the rule I had broken. He said he did not need a copy, he just needed the work order from the committee chair, and he had that. I asked if he could send me a copy of the work order. He laughed and said no, that was internal documentation. I asked if he knew the HOA was claiming my van was blocking emergency access when it was not. He said he did not investigate claims, he just responded to work orders, and then he hung up. I spent the next 6 hours building my case. I pulled up the county GIS map and downloaded a PDF showing the fire lane boundaries. I took photos of my van from 4 different angles, showing the distance to the hydrant, the guest pass on the dashboard, and the painted curb that clearly marked the legal guest parking zone. I screenshotted every message Janice had sent me through the portal, including the one where she said she could put me on the agenda and keep me there. I called the city fire marshal's office and asked them to confirm whether my van was in violation of any emergency access ordinance. They sent an inspector out that afternoon. He walked around my van, checked the hydrant, measured the distance with a tape measure, and told me I was fine. He said the fire lane started 10 feet past where my van was parked, and that guest parking was exempt as long as it was marked. He handed me a printed confirmation letter, no readable text, just a city seal and a signature. I thanked him and asked if he could email me a copy. He said he would, and he did, 20 minutes later. That was my evidence. But I still needed the trump card, and I did not have it yet. The tow truck showed up the next morning, exactly 48 hours after Janice's threat. I was inside making coffee when I heard the diesel engine rumble into the driveway. I looked out the window and saw the wheel lift backing up to my van, amber lights flashing. Janice was already in the driveway, reflective vest on, red bucket hat crooked, waving the driver into position. I grabbed my phone, checked the battery, 19%, not great, and went outside. That was when she shouted that my car was a hazard and the fee was non-refundable. The driver, a guy in his 50s wearing a stained t-shirt and work boots, climbed out of the cab and started connecting the wheel lift to my rear axle. I walked up and told him to stop. He ignored me. I told him I had documentation proving the van was not in violation. He said he did not care about documentation, he had a work order. I pulled out my phone and showed him the fire marshal's letter. He glanced at it for half a second and said that was between me and the HOA, then went back to connecting the lift. Janice stepped between me and the truck. "You are interfering with authorized enforcement," she said, her voice loud enough to carry across the street. "I have the authority to ban you from amenities for obstruction." I asked what amenities. She said the pool, the clubhouse, the guest parking, all of it. I told her she could not ban me from parking in my own neighborhood. She said guest parking was an amenity, not a right, and that the board had already approved escalated enforcement for repeat violators. I asked when I became a repeat violator. She said when I refused to comply with the first notice. The driver finished connecting the lift and climbed back into the cab. The hydraulics hissed and the rear of my van started to rise off the ground. I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a notification from the portal. New message from management. I opened it. The message was short. The board had scheduled an emergency hearing for parking violations, and I was required to attend. The hearing was in 4 hours. I looked at Janice. She was smiling now, arms crossed, watching my van lift into the air. "The tow yard adds an after-hours gate fee, and they are minutes from closing the window," she said. "If you want your van back today, you need to pay the release fee, the hazard fee, and the gate fee before 5 p.m. Otherwise, it sits until Monday and you pay storage." I checked my watch. It was 1:15. I asked how much the total was. She said she did not know. That was between me and the vendor, but it was probably over $600 by now. My phone battery dropped to 12%. I had been recording audio since I came outside, and the app was draining power fast. I needed to get to a charger, get to the hearing, and figure out how to stop this before the tow yard closed. But first I needed to let Janice think she had won. because the trump card was almost ready. I told her I would handle it and walked back inside. The tow truck pulled out of the driveway with my van's rear wheels off the ground, chains rattling. I watched it disappear around the corner, then plugged my phone into the charger and opened my email. The city fire marshal's letter was there. I forwarded it to myself 3 times, then printed 2 copies. I grabbed my work laptop and opened the HOA portal. I found the enforcement policy section and downloaded every document I could find. Most of them were locked behind login walls, but I had access because I was a homeowner. I found the towing vendor agreement. It was a scanned PDF, 8 pages, half of it redacted, but the signature page was visible. The agreement was signed by Janice and the vendor rep, dated 6 weeks ago, and it included a clause about revenue sharing. The HOA would receive 20% of all towing fees collected from residents. That was the twist. Janice was not just enforcing rules, she was profiting from them. The HOA was profiting from them. The towing vendor was paying the association a kickback for every car they hooked. I screenshotted the signature page and the revenue clause. I saved the PDF to my cloud drive. Then I opened a new email and typed out a message to the HOA attorney. I had found the attorney's contact info in one of the portal documents, a retainer agreement from 2 years ago. I kept the email short. I explained that I was a homeowner facing an improper towing action, that I had documentation proving the violation was false, and that I had discovered the HOA was operating a revenue-sharing agreement with the tow vendor without disclosing it to residents. I attached the screenshots and the fire marshal's letter. I asked if the attorney was aware of the arrangement and whether it was legal under Alabama HOA law. I hit send at 2:10 p.m. I did not expect a reply before the hearing, but I got one at 2:45. The attorney replied to my email and copied the board president and the management company. The email was 3 sentences. After reviewing the documentation provided, I am advising the board to immediately suspend all enforcement actions related to parking pending a full audit of the vendor agreement. I am also recommending the board retain independent counsel to review potential fiduciary duty violations. I will not be representing the association in any matters related to this issue going forward. That was the trump card. An HOA attorney email refusing to continue after seeing the misconduct. And I was going to play it on speaker outside the clubhouse so neighbors hear it in real time. The hearing was at 5:30, right when the tow yard gate closed. I got there at 5:15 with my phone fully charged, my laptop in a bag, and printed copies of everything. The clubhouse parking lot was half full. I recognized a few neighbors sitting in their cars, waiting for the meeting to start. One of them was Marcus, a retired teacher who lived 3 doors down and had been complaining about Janice's enforcement tactics for months. He was the ally I needed. I walked over to his car and knocked on the window. He rolled it down, and I handed him a printed copy of the attorney's email. "Read this," I said. "Then come inside and back me up." Marcus read the email twice, then looked up at me with wide eyes. "She has been running a scam this whole time," he said. I nodded. "I need you to confirm that when I bring it up." He said he would, and he got out of his car and followed me toward the clubhouse. Janice was standing outside the door, reflective vest on, clipboard in hand, checking people in like it was a courtroom. When she saw me, she stepped in front of the door. "You are not on the agenda," she said. I told her I was required to attend. She said required did not mean I got to speak, and that I would have to wait until public comment. I asked when public comment was. She said after the board addressed my violation, which meant I would not get a chance to speak until they had already voted. I told her that was not how hearings worked. She said it was how this hearing worked, and that if I did not like it, I could file an appeal after the decision. I pulled out my phone and opened the attorney's email. I held it up so she could see the screen. "Your attorney quit," I said. He quit because he found out you have been running a kickback scheme with the tow vendor." Janice's face went white. She grabbed for my phone, but I stepped back. Marcus stepped up next to me. "I can confirm that," he said loudly. "I just read the email. The HOA is taking 20% of every towing fee." Janice looked at Marcus, then back at me. "That is confidential board business," she said, her voice cracking. "You do not have authorization to access that document." I told her it was public record because it was part of an HOA contract, and that every homeowner had a right to see how their fees were being used. She said I was twisting the facts and that the vendor agreement was a standard enforcement partnership. I asked if standard included taking a cut of the fees. She did not answer. More neighbors were gathering near the door now, and a few of them had their phones out, recording. Janice realized she was losing control. She turned and went inside, slamming the door behind her. Marcus and I followed her in. The board was already seated at the front table. Ed, the board president, looked confused. Janice walked straight up to him and started whispering, but I did not give her time to spin it. I walked to the center of the room, pulled out my laptop, and connected it to the projector that was set up for the meeting. The screen on the wall lit up with my desktop. I opened the attorney's email and read it out loud, word for word. Ed's face went red. He looked at Janice. "Is this true?" She shook her head. "He is misrepresenting a legal consultation," she said. "That email is privileged." I told Ed the email was addressed to him and copied to management, which meant it was not privileged, it was official board communication. I opened the vendor agreement PDF and projected the signature page with the revenue clause highlighted. "This is what the attorney is talking about," I said. "The HOA has been taking 20% of every towing fee without disclosing it to residents. That is a conflict of interest and a fiduciary violation." One of the other board members, a woman named Linda, stood up and asked to see the document. I handed her a printed copy. She read it and passed it to the board member next to her. Janice tried to interrupt. "This is not the time or place for this discussion," she said. "We are here to address a parking violation." I told her there was no parking violation, and I pulled up the fire marshal's letter on the projector. "The city confirmed my van was not blocking emergency access," I said. "You called a tow truck on a legal parking spot because you wanted to collect a kickback." The room erupted. Neighbors started shouting questions. Someone asked how many cars had been towed under the agreement. Someone else asked if the board had voted to approve the revenue sharing. Ed banged a gavel on the table and called for order, but nobody was listening. Marcus stood up and said he had been towed 2 months ago for a guest pass issue, and that he paid $400 to get his car back. Another neighbor said she had been clipped for a decal violation and paid $300. The third neighbor said his daughter's car was towed from guest parking the week after the vendor agreement was signed. Janice tried to leave. She grabbed her clipboard and headed for the door, but Marcus blocked her. "You are not going anywhere," he said. "You owe us an explanation." Janice looked at Ed. "I am calling management, and I am going to be dramatic about it," she said, pulling out her phone again. Ed told her to put the phone down and sit. She refused. Ed stood up and raised his voice. "Janice, sit down or I am removing you from the committee right now." Janice sat. Her handheld scanner slipped from her hand and skittered across the floor, bouncing off a chair leg. Someone laughed. Janice's face turned red. Ed looked at me. "Do you have proof the tow was improper?" I nodded and pulled out the fire marshal's letter. I handed it to him. He read it, then passed it to Linda. Linda read it and shook her head. "This is bad," she said quietly. Ed asked if I had filed a complaint with the tow vendor. I told him I had, and that the vendor refused to release my van without payment. Ed asked how much. I told him over $600, and that the tow yard gate was closing in 15 minutes. Ed grabbed his phone and called the management company. He put it on speaker. The manager answered, and Ed explained the situation. The manager said the board needed to issue a written release authorization before the vendor would return the vehicle. Ed said he was issuing it right now, verbally, and that the manager needed to call the vendor immediately. The manager hesitated, then said he would try. Ed hung up and looked at me. If they do not release it tonight, the board will cover the fees and we will pursue recovery from the vendor. I thanked him. Then I turned to Janice. I can put you on the agenda and keep you there, I said, throwing her own line back at her. The room went quiet. Janice stared at me, her mouth open, no words coming out. Ed cleared his throat. Janice, effective immediately, you are removed from the safety committee. The board will be conducting a full audit of the vendor agreement and all enforcement actions taken under your authority. If we find evidence of misconduct, we will refer the matter to the state HOA oversight board and potentially law enforcement. You are also barred from participating in any enforcement activities pending the outcome of the audit. Janice stood up. You cannot do this, she said. I have the authority. Ed cut her off. You had authority, he said. You do not anymore. Now leave before I have you escorted out. Janice grabbed her clipboard, her reflective vest slipping off one shoulder, and walked out of the clubhouse. The door slammed behind her. The room was silent for a moment, then someone started clapping. Others joined in. Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. You just took down the whole operation, he said. The manager called Ed back 10 minutes later. The vendor had agreed to release my van without payment, and they were canceling the clamp fee and the hazard fee. Ed told me to go pick it up. I drove to the tow yard with Marcus following me in his car. We got there at 6:15, 15 minutes after the gate was supposed to close, but the yard was still open. The vendor rep met me at the gate and handed me my keys without a word. My van was parked near the fence, rear wheel still on the ground, no damage. I checked the dashboard. The guest pass was still there. The next 3 weeks were a blur. The board hired an independent auditor to review the vendor agreement and all enforcement actions taken in the past year. The auditor found that Janice had issued 73 towing authorizations in 6 months, and that the HOA had collected over $14,000 in kickbacks. The auditor also found that Janice had been submitting false violation reports to justify the tows, including claims of fire lane blockages, expired permits, and unregistered vehicles that were never verified. The board voted to terminate the vendor agreement immediately and refund all fees collected under the agreement. They also voted to publish new parking enforcement standards with clear timelines and notice requirements, and to require third-party verification for all future towing authorizations. The attorney's email became the centerpiece of a documented appeal that overturned the decision on the record. Every homeowner who had been towed under Janice's enforcement wave received a full refund and a formal apology from the board. The board also sent a letter to the state HOA Oversight Board requesting an investigation into the vendor agreement and Janice's conduct. The Oversight Board opened an investigation 3 weeks later. Janice tried to fight back. She sent an email to the entire neighborhood claiming the board had violated her rights and that she was being targeted for doing her job. Nobody replied. She showed up at the next board meeting and tried to speak during public comment, but Ed cut her off and told her she was no longer welcome at board meetings. She threatened to sue. The board responded by voting to remove her from all committees and strip her of her amenity access pending the outcome of the state investigation. At the next HOA election, a slate of reform candidates ran on a platform of transparency and accountability. They swept every open seat. Janice did not run. 2 months later, she put her house on the market and moved out of the neighborhood. The final showdown happened at the painted fire lane curb, where Karen claims authority she does not have. I was walking my dog one evening, about a month after the hearing, when I saw Janice standing near the guest parking zone with a handheld scanner in one hand and a clipboard in the other. She was taking pictures of a car parked in the spot where my van used to be. I walked over and asked what she was doing. She said she was documenting a violation for her records. I told her she did not have authority to document anything anymore. She said the board could not stop her from taking pictures on public property. I told her the parking lot was HOA property, not public property, and that she was trespassing. She said I could not tell her what to do. I pulled out my phone and called Ed. He answered on the second ring. I explained the situation. He told me to stay on the line, and he called the security guard who worked at the clubhouse. The guard showed up 5 minutes later and told Janice she needed to leave. She argued. The guard repeated the order. Janice looked at me, then at the guard, then back at me. I am calling management, and I am going to be dramatic about it, she said one last time. The guard told her to call whoever she wanted, but she needed to leave now. Janice walked back to her car and drove away. I never saw her in the neighborhood again. The outcome was clean. An attorney letter forced the HOA to void the entire enforcement waive, and residents voted Karen out at the next election. The board implemented new rules requiring the HOA to publish standards and timelines to all homeowners before any enforcement action could be taken. They also banned revenue-sharing agreements with vendors and required third-party verification for all towing authorizations. The new board president sent a letter to every homeowner apologizing for the misconduct and promising accountability. The state investigation concluded 6 months later with a finding that the vendor agreement violated Alabama HOA fiduciary duty laws. The HOA was fined, and Janice was personally fined and barred from serving on any HOA board in the state for 5 years. Karen was told to step down, and she could not spin it. I kept my van in guest parking. Nobody ever touched it again. I hope your driveway stays tow-free.